cults, arcades, paganism, subliminal messages, rituals, sacrifice, violence. What do all these things have in common? This seemingly random variety of things is all connected, and the way it is fascinating. Controversies about arcades are nothing new. The arcade has spawned many different urban legends and stories. Think about the iconic Polybius story, an arcade machine that was only in Portland, Oregon, that was potentially being used by the government to spy on people and mind control them. A story that's been around for over 20 years, and is still fascinating people to this day. Or what about the story of Berserk, an arcade game that seemingly took the life of 3 different people? On multiple occasions, young boys had heart attacks after playing this game, which led people to believe the machine was cursed. In reality, these people just suffered from pre-existing conditions. But nonetheless, the coincidence is noticeable. But there's definitely something bigger at play than just something like Polybius. Allegedly, an arcade game developed by Midway by the name of Carnival was actually being used as a pagan Celtic cult ceremony, being made by people who were an extremist right-wing cult that awfully abused its members. Now, this may sound absolutely insane, and it kind of is. The notion that consumption of violent media makes a person violent is often disregarded as complete fiction. However, some do believe that you can be fully desensitized to this sort of gore and awful imagery if you expose yourself to enough of it, even if it is just through the means of gory video games and movies. This would lead one to more easily become a stone-cold killer, or at least these were the beliefs that this cult held. Now you're probably very curious as to what Carnival even is, and to understand the whole mystery at play, we must look at Carnival first. So join me as we take a look at the Carnival cult. The first part of this video is going to be taking a look at directly the video game and the development cycle around it, alongside the imagery at play. This will give us a better understanding of the more occult stuff. Releasing on October 31st, 1998 by the now defunct Midway, the company set out to make a creepy carnival game inspired by the 1962 film Carnival of Souls. Carnival aspired to take the player through a bunch of grisly set pieces in an evil, hellish carnival. Carnival was conceptualized by a man named Jack Hager in 1988 while he was working on the video game Narc. Narc on its own is an incredibly bizarre and gruesome game where you kill a bunch of drug dealers and drug users, but regardless, Jack had some really cool ideas on how to make Carnival work. See, Carnival has pre-rendered backgrounds that are essentially a movie that guides you through the game. This way, you could have detailed and fleshed out environments without sacrificing the graphics of everything else in the game. The enemies, power-ups, and basically everything you interact with is actually separate from the background. Jack originally wanted his background footage to be done with stop-motion animation, but decided that using CGI would be the best way to go. Midway ended up approving this pitch and started production on the game. Or so the public story says. Light gun shooter games were really successful at the time, so it seemed like a good idea to just do this game. Originally, the game had a similar tone to Disney's Haunted Mansion ride, but after being harshly reviewed by Midway's management, they decided to take the game in a different, much darker tone, while still having aspects of comedy. Over 40 characters were created and modeled in 3D Studio Max, which was a popular software at the time. A quote from the artist and 3D modeler Scott Pikulski perfectly sums up the game's production and what it was like at the time. Many ideas for characters and level content came from us just joking around while working on the game. It always felt like the project would be cancelled at any time, so we worked on it like we had nothing to lose. Jack has a great sense of humor, and many of the great ideas came from his head. The expressions of these characters, which are very expressive, were inspired by a book called Fellini's Faces, which led to very unique and expressive enemies. Despite being just an arcade game, Carnival actually has a pretty cool story. The game takes place in the fictional town of Greeley Valley, Iowa, where an evil theme park ran by a man named Ludwig von Tokentaker once stood. After a devastating incident, the theme park and everyone in it just burned to the ground and was never seen again. Shortly after, a tombstone with the skull of a jester appeared in the same spot the place burned down. An urban legend in the area claims that if you feed the jester a golden token, then Ludwig von Tokentaker and his undead carnival will rise from the earth. 2 kids are riding Spooky Sam's Ghost Tour, a local themed attraction that goes to the graveyard and tells spooky stories from the graveyard. These kids know about the urban legend, so they hop off and then find the tombstone. They then decide to insert the token right into the mouth of the jester and bring Carnival back to life. Armed with some shotguns from the Carnival's shooting gallery, they go through an evil carnival and kill everything in their path, with the intention to take down Tokentaker. A civilian by the name of Betty somehow gets stuck with them, so they have to make sure that they don't accidentally harm her. So right after loading your quarters into the machine, you're greeted with a selection screen in the form of a shooting gallery. You're presented with 3 levels to choose from: the Haunted House, Rickety Town, and the freak show. Let's start with the haunted house. Now before you start playing, you're greeted by a floating jester head known as Umlaut, who tells little riddles that basically introduce you to the level that you're about to play. These little speeches are super charming and amusing and perfectly set the tone for the level you're about to play. So the haunted house one is the more basic out of the bunch. But that doesn't make it any less fun. You primarily fight zombies and these floating specter things. Something that's really special about this game is the feel of it. The game perfectly captures the vibe of a carnival in every way. To me, carnivals are a bit of a surreal experience. Growing up with Coney Island, which in its own way is really creepy, I've always felt a bit uneasy when at carnivals, while also having a ton of fun with them. And this game, albeit in a more morbid way, really perfectly emulates that. While going through the haunted house, you'll encounter a Hambone, a clear homage to Friday the 13th. Only this guy's got a minigun arm. Like most arcade shooters, you can find a variety of different power-ups that help you along the way. Of course, there's the obvious health, extra ammo, shotgun, etc., but there are also some more unique ones like the acid gun and the flamethrower. The boss of this level is named Evil Marie, who is a floating, gothic-looking, scantily clad lady thing. Of course, you have to gun her down. But if I'm being completely honest, if I saw a tall, goth woman approaching me like that, my first response wouldn't be to unload a mag on her. But hey, maybe that's just me. As you shoot her, you continue to knock her clothes off until she really doesn't have any anymore. Interesting fact, this is one of the first video games to feature jiggle physics. So, her death animation is actually pretty impressive. Remember how I mentioned that the game's background is pre-rendered and all the models in the game are separate? Well, Evil Marie gets impaled on something that's technically not even there. Pretty cool. After finishing that, you go to Rickety Town, which is inspired by the classic movie The Nightmare Before Christmas, which by the way is 100% a Halloween movie and not a Christmas movie, just to be clear. Anyway, this level starts off with you blasting down a bunch of evil elves on a Christmas ride. This Christmassy stuff, to me, kind of contradicts the whole Halloween vibe going for it, so it feels a bit off. Eventually, you get onto the lumberjack ride and get attacked by a bunch of these gross, bug-eyed fly things. Rickety Town is kind of a variety level. You'll encounter a large variety of very unique enemies, like the Mr. Smileys, who sing in the background. These dinosaur things that are actually from the Midway game Trog, and you'll walk through a food court, which is filled with zombie teenagers who moon you and throw food at you. The level ends with an encounter with Krampus, returning to the Christmas theme. You can then visit the freak show, which is one of the more crazier levels in the game. As you'd expect, you fight a variety of different freaks, most notably these goofy sounding conjoined twins. These disgusting maggots with shriveled up human-like faces, which fly at you, making you pump a ton of quarters into the game. Spider monkeys, which are pretty constant throughout the level, which are actual, like, spider monkeys. There's a mini-boss similar to Hambone called Eyeclops, who will definitely gross out some people who hate seeing a bunch of eyes and bumps coming from skin. After defeating Eyeclops, you enter a torture dungeon, which to me is the more disturbing part of this game. You'll see a bunch of these torture zombies that sometimes just finish themselves off before you can even get the chance to. Eventually, one of them gets ground up, and you see that its remains are being put into giant baby cups on an assembly line. You'll learn that these cups are leading directly to the level's boss. This is where the main controversy starts. This level's boss is a giant mutated baby called Junior that you have to fight while creepy rendition of Pop Goes the Weasel plays. Now, for obvious reasons, arcade owners weren't too comfortable with there being a game where you just gun down a giant zombie baby, so Midway decided to have an alternate version of this boss known as Deddy, a giant teddy bear. This change makes sense, since I'm pretty sure that the whole concept of Junior is one that the majority of people wouldn't be comfortable with. At the end of the fight, either Junior or Deddy get electrocuted and you get to continue to the final level, the Big Top. So obviously the Big Top is the grand finale. Taking place in a circus, you're met with clowns of all shapes and sizes, alongside mimes who actually don't do anything to you. Yeah, that's right, they literally just do mime stuff, but you shoot them anyway. And you make your way into a room filled with doctor clowns who want to cut you open and take your brain so they can put it in a gorilla. Eventually, you fight Ludwig von Tokentaker alongside Umlaut in a really difficult final boss battle. Check out what happens after you beat him. Yeah, look at that. Crazy stuff, huh? The game just ends the way that it starts, and it's technically an infinite loop. The nightmare will never end since the kid always puts the token right back into its slot. It's honestly kind of a devastating ending if you really think about it. The guns that you used in the arcade cabinet were actually pretty cool. There were these small pump-action shotguns that felt pretty good to shoot. You could either shoot off screen like a traditional light gun game, or alternatively you could cock the shotgun, which is obviously a lot more fun and satisfying. Despite being shotguns, what you fire looks like 9mm bullets, and the shotgun is actually a power-up that you can find. This game has got a bit of a mysterious aura to it in a way. Something that's genuinely pretty unnerving about this game is that the game kind of just disappeared. Initially, there were a ton of these arcade cabinets that were sold, and the game was really popular and successful. Many arcades hosted the game, but only for a somewhat short amount of time. Many of these cabinets just ended up being replaced with different games. This gives Carnival a kind of otherworldly, supernatural vibe to it, in the sense that it's so rare and bizarre, yet so awesome and cool. I think the most logical explanation for this is that the games were removed from arcades because of the graphic violence, which might have garnered some controversy. Since Midway Games went bankrupt in 2010, the rights to this game are a total mess, and are shared between different companies who don't seem to want to bring this back. So unfortunately, I doubt we'll be seeing a remake anytime soon. However, in recent times, there's kind of a conspiracy that's surrounded this game. A 4chan post from 2020 states, "Behind Carnival, some of the members associated with the game were part of a pagan cult." And it's kind of backed by the actual game. But before we get into this, it's time for a quick word from our sponsor, Scentbird. I have teamed up with Scentbird. Scentbird is a fragrance subscription service that lets you try a bunch of different types of designer fragrances for just $17 a month. Cologne and perfume, it's a big thing to a lot of people, but they don't want to invest the big bucks for the really good stuff. But the thing is, with Scentbird, you don't have to. It's cheap and you get a whole bunch of different types of samples that'll last you a good while. And with Scentbird, it's a hassle-free experience. If you want to cancel or pause your subscription anytime, you can. And a good thing is too, unlike a lot of these random like loot box sort of things, you actually get to choose what fragrances you get, so there's no surprises. You can't get one that you end up hating. Like, you know what you're gonna get, which is amazing. They have over 600 different types of scents, right? Some of them are perfume, some of them are cologne, and many are also unisex. As a ghoul myself, I love it. It's great. You know, you gotta smell good when you're scaring people. You gotta do it. It's the way to go. And Scentbird, it's not just like low-level stuff, okay? They carry brands like Gucci, Prada, and Versace, as well as a bunch of indie labels too, so you're supporting smaller businesses. The thing is, you can be sure that you're getting a premium scent each month, okay? With each fragrance, you get about a 30-day supply of them, right? So you can decide if you really want to go in and invest for the big one, which sometimes it can be up to like $300 to $500, and you're getting a sample for $17. When I got my Scentbird samples, I actually was really surprised because of how good they smelled. Like, I like all of them. This one here is my favorite, and it's Versace. So, you know, it's pretty high quality stuff. Boom. You can smell absolutely incredible. And not only do I love it, but people I know also do. To the point where, you know, they go in for a hug and also a sniff, which you may think is odd, but I take it as a compliment, honestly, and a testament to how good this product is. This Halloween, use my coupon code Raymundo and grab yourself some Scentbird. It's 55% off if you use my code, which is about a little over $7. It's available in the United States and Canada, and that is all. If we look into the files, we'll see some leftover assets from earlier times of development. For example, there's a picture of Sailor Jupiter in the files, alongside a picture of the main developer's head being held by Jeffrey Dahmer. However, this story claims that there's something a lot darker to it. Something that is also in the game's files is an unused track for a Tunnel of Love level. The tunnel itself was alleged to have contained shocking content and coded messages that the cultists would get, but would be meaningless to anyone else.
The tunnel itself was alleged to have shocking footage and coded messages that the cultists would get, but would be meaningless to anyone else. Some of the footage and imagery included an array of images related to Celtic paganism and Guro anime, artwork as well as clips from the following titles with the following directors and release dates: The Wicker Man, Robin Hardy, 1973, Born to Raise Hell, Roger Earl, 1975, Cannibal Holocaust, Ruggero Deodato, 1980, Legend of Lion Flare, Yorihisa Uchida, 1986, Urotsuka Doji, Legend of the Overfiend, Hideki Takayama, 1989. By the way, I have no idea if I pronounced any of those Japanese words right, I tried my best. Other footage I was informed of were the Bud Dwyer tape in GIF format, and some taped rituals, possibly involving nudity, sex, and animal or human sacrifice. The tunnel and the console port were both going to have various clips from these assorted sources, but were cut for being illegal and difficult. Bud Dwyer's death is legally available and not under copyright, so all that's left is either the taped ritual being illegal, or more likely, the movie and anime footage being a case of copyright infringement and being unlicensed. The music sounds like smooth jazz elevator music you'd hear in softcore cable porn, like on late night Cinemax back in the day. It's obviously meant to be a tunnel of love to keep in tune with the game's Carnival fairground theme, and because it's meant as a virtual sex ritual, blending sex and violence, as was a part of Celtic pagan rites in the ancient times. Midway's higher-ups made sure the tunnel was cut because it was too offensive and they did not want arcade owners to ban the game. If you played Carnival, then you would know the Tunnel of Love would be really fucked up to be too offensive for the most twisted arcade game ever made. The devs who were part of the cult also were weebs, the old school 90s weebs who were known as otaku and liked violent edgy shit and guro hentai. Well, the game's credits even mentioned Princess Serenity in the credits under special thanks, and this cult I was in did have members in multiple states and even a small group in Ontario. The leader in the Canadian branch was a stereotypical otaku who was obsessed with Sailor Mercury and was on a Dateline report, but a lot of his more overt, neat otaku behavior was meant as an act to fool people into thinking he was an incompetent basement dweller instead of the Canadian equivalent of Lord Summerisle. Video linked here. The segment with Greg the Otaku / Future Druid begins at 10:57. He was not the leader at the time the interview took place in the 90s though, and I'm not sure if he had any connections to Carnival or, more specifically, the Lost Console version that was an entirely different kind of game instead of a mere arcade port.
The story claims that Jack Hager didn't actually have any association with the cult, it was his concept, but it was basically co-opted by them. The story claims that the reason that the Tunnel of Love level was cut is because it was just way too graphic and offensive, which makes sense. Apparently they had some really distasteful depictions of sex alongside a bunch of blood and guts that the game is known for. According to the OP, there were supposed to be a bunch of footage that would play on the screen during this level, scenes from gory anime and intense horror films. One notable thing mentioned is the Wicker Man, which was actually a thing that Celtic pagans would do. Essentially, as a form of the ultimate sacrifice to the gods, Wicker Men were built, which were these giant statues of humans made with wood. Inside of them would be a bunch of different people and animals. As part of the ritual, the Wicker Man would be lit on fire, leaving everything inside it to die a long and very painful death. In layman's terms, the more prolonged and extreme the death, the more value it held to the gods. That was basically the thought process. Now this is being done as a ceremony for Samhain, which is the holiday that was essentially stolen from the pagans by Christians and turned into All Hallows Eve, which later turned into Halloween. Carnival's release date was October 31st, Halloween, and Samhain takes place on November 1st. So this post implies that the date the game came out is intentional as part of the ritual. Allegedly, these people who were associated with the cults were also big into anime. These were like early weebs, back when anime wasn't as popular and accepted as it is now. One of these devs associated was on Dateline, where he talked about his love for Sailor Mercury. Allegedly, this interview was done to trick people into thinking he was just some weirdo instead of being the leader of a cult. There was a console port in the works. However, it wasn't necessarily a port, more so it was a reimagining of the game, or a sequel of sorts, and this was outsourced by Midway. Apparently this cult was very, very right-wing, and had a lot of weapons. Their initiation was incredibly awful, and very violent and evil, really. This cult would allegedly do animal sacrifices, so this thing was really the real deal. They recruited people from more alternative scenes, people who were big into D&D, people in the goth and metal scenes, and general outcasts. They gave them a place where they'd feel accepted and be part of a community. Now, as the post goes, apparently they believed that if exposed to enough violent and disturbing material, you could be desensitized and more likely to be able to carry out those acts in real life. Hence why Carnival is so violent. A lot of the actual development of Carnival was done in Iowa, and the game takes place in Iowa. In this story, this cult also takes place in Iowa. Apparently this cult was obsessed with the zombie apocalypse. They'd use the term of zombie apocalypse as a code for training for a doomsday scenario. Keep in mind, this was a very heavily armed group, so the more you think about it, the more disturbing it gets. Now, I can't really go through the full extent of this post since it's, very disturbing, and a lot of the things would definitely not let this video be seen by everyone. But I'm sure you're all wondering, is this legit? Is Carnival really developed by a cult? And is it really something that's trying to initiate people into this thing and desensitize them? Well, the thing is, I personally don't think so. The OP claims all of this to be 100% true, and they back it up with so much information, which makes it really believable. However, there's no concrete evidence of anything. There are a few loosely related facts that don't necessarily prove much. It would kind of be like me saying that I found Bigfoot, but instead of actually describing what he looked like, or how I found him, I'd give a lot of details about where, the history of the area in which I found him, some of the locals who live there, and perhaps my surroundings. It sounds related, but it doesn't substantiate to me actually finding Bigfoot. There's so much information in this post, but it doesn't necessarily prove that Carnival was indeed created by a cult. It's also something kind of about just the numbers of it. Allegedly, they were members of this cult around the US and in Canada. So let's say that there is a pagan cult rising in power, and they're trying to infiltrate the entertainment industry, which is worth hundreds of billions of dollars, and it was at the time as well. It's a little bit strange that no one would have talked about that for 20 years until an anonymous person finally leaked something about it on 4chan, with little to no evidence. I don't think it's completely impossible that the poster is correct and what they're saying is true. I hope it isn't, but I can't completely say it isn't. However, I think I can safely assume that it's not. So if this is just a creepypasta or a new urban legend, well done, because it's really interesting and honestly it's very unnerving. In total, Carnival is a really fantastic game and is absolutely perfect for Halloween in a way that most games aren't. If you want to actually play this game for yourself and you've got some knowledge on running arcade ROMs, then I highly suggest you do, since the game's a lot of fun. If anyone knows how to get this game running on a Mac, please let me know, since that would be my only way of playing it. It's unlikely that you find this game in an actual arcade, but if you do, I highly recommend giving it a try. Carnival really sets itself apart from games like the House of the Dead and Time Crisis and stuff like that. When you kill an enemy, its corpse will just stay there. It doesn't melt away or disappear. To be fair, you'll often turn around pretty quickly, so it doesn't stay for long, but it's still a really cool feature. I find myself asking, will we ever have a game like Carnival again? And honestly, I'm not really sure. The game is such a specific thing, and it's so ghoulish and gory to the point where it feels like it wouldn't really fit nowadays with modern graphics. And to be completely clear, I would love to see a game like Carnival make a return, but I just don't really think it would happen. Not that I want a game that could be potentially linked to a cult, but you know. Alright, so that wraps up for my video on Carnival, and I hope you enjoyed it. I've been trying to get this video for like 2 years now. It was originally supposed to come out in 2021, or at least part of it, and then I added more to it in 2022, and then added more to it now. I want to thank Scare.Theater for coming on here. Eric, you're a legend. I love you, man. And I also want to thank Scentbird, because they make videos like this possible, and also my bad spending habits possible too. So thank you very much. Do you think Carnival's cursed? Do you think it's a cult game? I mean, I guess it's definitely a cult game, like cult classic. But made by a cult? I don't know. I don't know about all that. However, what I do know about is that I feel like it's kind of cursed in like a spiritual way, because since making this video, or like writing the script, recording it, I've had like really incredibly bad luck, either breaking things or losing them, or just bad things happening. And I don't know why, and I can only attribute it to talking about the occult and whatever. So, guys, if you don't want to get cursed by this video, comment, "I don't want to get cursed," and you won't get cursed. Feed my algorithm. Please. It lets me buy things. Anyway, yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you thought about it. Is Carnival really what it's cracked up to be? Have you ever played it before? And if you have, how'd you enjoy it? And if you know how to play on a Mac, please tell me. I want to play it. That's about all I have to say. This is my first video done by an editor that isn't myself, so if it seems a little different, then that's why. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Have a good one. Enjoy. Happy Halloween.